James Galbraith, you lead a project in Texas University on inequality, the Inequality Project. What is the project and what have you discovered about inequality?
The University of Texas Inequality Project is an informal research group which I've been directing for over 20 years now with just cohorts of PhD and master students. And its objective is to provide a better basis for the measurement of economic inequalities all the way around the world using very readily available data sources and filling out the historical record across countries, across continents. And this has been very useful because it enables you to see patterns in the movement of inequality which are directly related to the major developments in the world economy, such as the changes of the global financial regime, the debt crisis in the 1980s, the peak of the NASDAQ boom in the 2000s, things of this nature, which clearly resonate around the world.
You say these international events resonate around the world, but is it not within individual countries themselves? We see a lot of difference between, say, Finland and Arizona.
Well, they're all affected by global financial trends. I mean, you can see what's happening right now in the world economy as the United States raises interest rates, and you see the massive declines in the currency values from Argentina to Turkey to South Africa, all over particularly the so-called emerging markets. This is a global phenomenon. And then what we are able to measure are the repercussions of that inside each of these economies so that we can see that the effects fall more harshly on, let's say, lower income workers than they do on salaried employees or people who are working in the export trades. That makes a big difference for the social structure of each country that you're looking at.
The impact that we see of still the 2008 financial crisis is still reverberating. What are you aware of any, or do you make a broader link between the economy and stability in general across the world?
Oh, I think there's a very strong link between economic developments and political stability, and you can see this in Europe. Europe had a very long hangover of the financial crisis because it morphed into the European and the Euro crisis, and as a result of that, for example, and Greece, of course, is one of the country that was most sharply affected, but Italy did not recover from the slump in 2007, 2008, still, I believe, has a GDP lower than it was at that time. And the Italian voters, being fed up, constituted a populist coalition in their last elections, basically replacing both of their previous major parties with the Liga and the Five Star Movement. So that's a sign, a very clear indication of how the failure to cope with the economic consequences of the crisis has led to major political changes.
And if I could ask you about your own country, we see Donald Trump, who's widely considered to be a populist president, and yet his tax plans, for example, really do not benefit the wider public. It is really of benefit to the richest. Will other countries follow?
Well, the U.S. economy has maintained quite a bit of strength. The tax bill that Trump put through certainly does benefit the wealthy. It also has produced substantial increases in corporate investment because of the expensing provisions of that bill. Will other countries follow suit? Well, I would hope for a more progressive result in other countries. I would hope for a more progressive result eventually in the United States. But for the moment, we're rather stuck with Mr. Trump, and even worse with the Republican leadership in Congress.
And in terms of multilateralism, this is what this conference is about. What can the IMFs, the World Banks, the big global institutions do about this? Can they do anything, or are they secondary?
The IMF certainly is very secondary. The IMF is stuck in a ideological trap that was developed in the 1970s and 80s and has been, I think, worse than useless in global financial crises ever since. It was certainly the architect of a disastrous economic program for Greece, for example, in the most recent incarnation. So what we're seeing here is not only a need to recognize that the world is and will be multipolar, it's also a need to recognize that that the ideological model that's been pursued by the dominant institutions in the West for the last generation has left the entire region at a strong disadvantage compared, for example, to the Chinese, who never adopted the neoliberal regime. And I say that as having been an advisor at one point to the Chinese government. So it's very clear to me that they did not adopt this model, and they have benefited from their refusal to do so.
On trade, some people have gone so far as to describe the current situation as trade wars. From your perspective, given that it is Trump who is really leading this revolt against the WTO in a sense, or the rules-based system, what does it mean for trade globally?
Well, I think for the time being, the United States is showing that it has an enormous amount of muscle, which Trump is prepared to exercise, and by and large is exercising. I mean, the effects of that are being felt by other countries, not so much in the United States, in the sense that these are really powerful tools from Trump's point of view. It does disrupt the system, and one has to expect that if you inflict a lot of damage for a long period of time on your trading partners, that they're going to be less inclined to, they're going to look for other arrangements sooner or later. But from Trump's point of view, he's got a fairly short political horizon. He has to show results in the next few years, and I would not be surprised to discover that this policy works out from his point of view.
He's justified the aluminium and steel tariffs on the grounds of national security. Do you see Canada and Europe as a threat to the US national security?
Well, as a son of a Canadian, naturally, I understand that the influence of Canadian ideas is very subversive on the United States, but that I consider to be quite a good thing. Obviously, it's obvious that the pressure on Canada is to benefit Michigan at the expense of Ontario, and this has nothing to do with U.S. national security.